Hi there, my name is Jeff Fritz, and I'm a member of the Visual Studio team, and I'd like to welcome you to using Visual Studio 2019. The first time you start Visual Studio, you're going to see a screen that looks like this behind me. There's the left half that'll show you the list of recent projects that you've been working on. This is the first time we've opened Visual Studio, so there's nothing here yet. On the right side, you can choose to get started in several different ways with some existing code, or even start a new project. Or, if you really don't want to start with any code, you can click this link down at the bottom to continue without opening any code whatsoever. Let's get started and build our first .NET Core console application using C#. I'll scroll down and choose the Create New Project option, and it'll prompt me to choose from a series of templates that are available that come as part of Visual Studio. The one we're looking for is this one right at the top, console application with .NET Core. It's going to be built with C#. It can run on Linux, Mac OS, or Windows, and it's a console application. So I'll choose that and click Next. Now I can name my project. Let's call this First Application. That folder is fine, and the solution, the grouping of all of my projects, we'll just give it the same name and tell it to create. There we go. Visual Studio is opened, and there's our first file, Program CS. You can see it here in the Solution Explorer on the left, and the contents here on the right. This is a C# file. The .cs extension indicates that it contains C# program code. This is our program class, and it has one method, static void main, and it takes a collection of arguments called args that are passed into it. It does one thing, write line to the console, hello world. Let's press F5 and start this application and see what happens when we run it. Did you see it? Did you see it? It opened and closed so fast we really couldn't see it if it was writing hello world or not. So here's what we're going to do. I can run this application again, but disable the debugger and we'll see the results. There's several different ways that I can do that, but I'm going to press Control F5 and it runs it without the debugger, and I get it saying hello world right there above me, and press any key to continue. Fantastic. It showed me hello world and it worked just fine. I can add a little bit of code right here after this console write line to actually prompt every time to press any key to continue. I can do that by including another call to console.writeLine. And take a look at this. This is called IntelliSense inside of Visual Studio. This is Visual Studio telling us a little bit of the features that are available to us that we can use as part of the C# programming language with the console object. It's also giving us a little bit of a description as to what this method does. Writes the current line terminator to the standard output stream. So I'll just finish this, press any key to continue, semicolon, and now I'll actually have it listen for any key to be pressed. Console.readKey. There we go. I'll press F5 to start it again, or I can actually click this play button up here at the top and it'll start my application. There it is. Hello world, press any key to continue, and if I press any key, it finishes and I'm returned to Visual Studio. Alright, that's your first application here in Visual Studio 2019. What are you going to build? What do you want to know about Visual Studio going forward? We've got a bunch of great resources for you on the Visual Studio YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Visual Studio and you can learn about all the great features that are available. There's also fantastic blog articles for you on devblogs.microsoft.com/Visual Studio. You can learn about some of the great features and some of the things that we have planned and that are on the roadmap for the next updates to Visual Studio. Join some of the members of the Visual Studio team on weekly shows that we host on our Twitch channel. Go to twitch.tv/Visual Studio and click the follow button so you can be notified every time that they go live with an additional show talking about all the great things that are going on in the Visual Studio community. Thanks so much for watching. Best of luck to you in all the great code projects that you have ahead of you. Take care.
Safe mode is a way we can start Visual Studio without loading any extensions. So this is used for when you have installed an extension that might cause trouble, that crash VS, and you need to either disable or uninstall it. So for that we can use safe mode. And in order to start Visual Studio up in safe mode, we go to the developer command prompt. And I'm going to write dev-env. Now that is the Visual Studio process, like the executable for Visual Studio. So dev-env/safe mode. This will start Visual Studio up without loading any third-party extensions. And there it is. So it starts up, it looks pretty normal. If we go and take a look at the extension manager dialog, we can see that our installed extensions have been disabled. So now it's easy for me to come in and uninstall the ones that are causing trouble, and closing down Visual Studio and opening it up normally, and I'm back to being productive. So that's the whole goal of the safe mode, is to bring you into the extension manager dialog so you can uninstall or disable any troublesome extensions. I hope that was helpful. I do a lot of different type of development. Sometimes I build websites, other times I build Visual Studio extensions, and other times yet I build Windows apps. And I use different extensions, I use different window layouts, and depending on which of these type of applications I build. So wouldn't it be kind of cool if there was a way that I could customize Visual Studio for each of these different scenarios or application types that I build? Well, what if I said that there was a way to do that? And it's a feature called root suffix. It allows us to start up Visual Studio in a way that it uses its own copy of its internal registry. If I don't synchronize settings, it can have its own theme, it can have its own Windows layout, and all these different things that sets it apart from the regular instance of Visual Studio. So let's take a look at how we do that. So here I have Visual Studio. It's sort of my general purpose thing. This is what I use. This is my typical layout for any type of app that I build. Now let's say I want to create something for when I build Visual Studio extensions that I want for that particular version of Visual Studio. I want different types of extensions installed. So let's go to the developer command prompt and type dev-env and then /root suffix space and then any name I can think of. ext for extension, that's something I can remember. So let's execute that. And it starts Visual Studio up. And you can see I've already used this root suffix before. And so you can see it looks different. And if we look down at the taskbar here, we can see it is the same version of Visual Studio. Right? They're side by side, but they have different window layout, and they have different toolbars visible. And also, if we look at the extensions that are installed, we can see here that here's one set of extensions that I have specifically for extension development. And if we go over to the other one, we can see that it is a different set of extensions that are here for this particular instance. So it's the same version of Visual Studio, but using the root suffix command line switch, I can separate them out. Just remember, if you wanna keep theming and other things separate from each of these instances, disable the synchronization of settings. Otherwise, once you're signed into Visual Studio, it will synchronize settings across all your different root suffixes and so on. So that is one very easy way to differentiate the different workloads and have Visual Studio customized for each of them. Thanks for watching. Let's look at some tips and tricks for working with HTML in Visual Studio. Let's first define what I mean by HTML. So if we go into Tools Options, under Text Editors, we can see that we actually have two HTML editors in Visual Studio. We have one specifically for dealing with web forms, so ASP.NET web forms, so ASPX pages, user controls, master pages. And then we have one for everything else. It's Razor or static HTML or any other variation of HTML goes to the other HTML editor. And this other one is the newer one, and it was introduced in Visual Studio 2013. And that's the one we're going to look at today. So here I have an HTML file. I copied it from some place I found online, and it's all like minified into one line. So that's kind of annoying. I would like to see it sort of nicely formatted. So I can format the document, and that might get me some way there. But Visual Studio actually has a command called unminify. And clicking that gives us this nice unminified view, nicely formatted, so I can see what's going on. Let's drag in a picture. So from Solution Explorer, I can drag a picture in like that. Super convenient. And let's see what we can do with this image here. So notice how a light bulb show up. And I can encode this image as base 64. That's not what I want here, but I want to get the width and the height attributes automatically inserted. So Visual Studio goes in, checks out the picture, and figures out what the height and width is, and inserts it for me in these attributes. This is really good for performance, and also making sure that when the web page renders in the browser, that the browser knows up front what the height and width of the picture is, so that you don't get these loading sort of unevenly, and you're reading the top and then things move around. By giving the browser the information of the height and width of our elements, it can much better give us a better rendering experience. So that's really convenient, and I really like that feature. Another thing we can do is we can wrap any element or any text, anything that's selected, with another element. So the feature is called Wrap with Div. It looks like this. It's selected, so I can change it to, let's say, a span. There we go. And I'm going to do a line break. So I'm going to just format the document, Control-KD. And now that looks a little bit better. Actually, I want that span here. I want that to be wrapped with a div like that, let's say. So when makes it super easy for me to add these parent-child relationships. So that's all built in. Here's another nice feature. I get class name intelligence. So hero is the name of a class that I defined up here. And so that's really nice that I can get the intelligence for that right out of the box. There's a bunch more to the HTML editor that makes it a really nice HTML editor app, but I want to show you something that an extension that I install can do that expands on this functionality. So if I open the extension manager, you can see here I have an extension called HTML Tools 2019. There's also one for 2017 and earlier if you just install Web Essentials. So HTML Tools 2019 is included in Web Essentials. So if you already have Web Essentials, you already have this extension as well. Otherwise, just go out and download it, and let's take a look at what that gives us on top of what I just showed. So one thing is I get image hover preview. So simply just hover over an image and see what it looks like, and what we can also see at the bottom of the preview what the size of that image is. Very convenient. Here's another one. Let's go to the style sheet, or the style attribute here, or sorry, the style element, and I can now say extract to file. So I can take a style element and move it into a file. So I'm going to call it site.css. And the file is created for me. And inserted instead of the style element is now a link reference to that style sheet. So that's very, very nice. So let's do this. Then we have a very nice thing here with the class name hero. So it's fine that I get IntelliSense for hero, but what if I want to see what is defined in that style rule? Well, I can do peak definition. So peak definition or Alt F12, and that will find the style definition in my style sheet and display it to me here. And I can actually edit it directly. It's just in HTML editor. There we go. Double. That's not a bad idea. There we go. So I even get IntelliSense in this peak definition window. This, by the way, works with less files and SAS files as well, not just CSS. I now decide that I have too many parents here around my image tag. I don't want that span tag, so I'm going to remove it. So that's a little cumbersome. I'm going to have to format the document afterwards. But what if I just do the light bulb that now says remove span and keep children? That just removes the span, and it formats the children inside of it to its new parent. Very convenient. Label. This has to do with IntelliSense. So there's a bunch of IntelliSense things that comes with this extension called HTML tools. And one of them is IntelliSense for things that are defined within the same document. So one of them is in the for attribute. In a label, I need to say that it's for a specific input field. And in this case, I get all the valid things that it could be a label for. In this case, it's the input field with the ID of name. And you saw how I got that IntelliSense. So this goes for data list as well. It goes for a lot of other things where we have dynamic IntelliSense based on the content of the document. And all this comes from HTML tools. So I hope this was helpful to give you a little bit of tips and tricks on what's possible in the Visual Studio HTML editor. Thank you. Let's see how we can add colorization and syntax highlighting to languages that Visual Studio does not support out of the box. So here I have a file open. It's a stylus file. Stylus is a language that is a variation of the CSS language for web development. And you can see it opens up here just as plain text. I don't have any colors. So what do I do? Well, first of all, I'm going to open the extension manager to see whether there are any extensions supporting stylus out on the marketplace. We see there's one extension here, but it doesn't seem to have anything to do with colorization or syntax highlighting. So I'm going to go to the website. Here's the stylus website and see if they have any extensions here. It doesn't look like they do, but they do have a GitHub repository. So let's see what they got there. And we can see here they have something called a TM bundle. TM bundle, TM stands for TextMate. And so TextMate is what powers a bunch of editors out in the wild, Visual Studio Code, Sublime, etc., with syntax highlighting. And it's a format. We can take a look at what it looks like here. TM language, that is one of the supported file names for this TextMate syntax. So TextMate syntax can either be in XML or in JSON format. There's also YAML, but I think JSON and XML are the most common ones. And oftentimes the file extension used for the XML ones are either like here TM language or plist. But either way, they're the same format in XML. Okay, so this is how a lot of extensions, they syntax highlight the stylus language. So how do we get the TextMate grammar file, which is this one, into Visual Studio? Well, first of all, I'm going to install an extension. So let's search for TextMate. And we can see I already have the TextMate grammar template installed. And that allows me to create a new project called a TextMate. Let's search for TextMate. A TextMate grammar extension. Let's call this Stylus Language. That's the name of my project. So here we see the project, which is an extension project. So I'm actually writing a Visual Studio extension, and we can see that this template gives me sort of everything I need in order to support this language. And it opened the language.plist file, which is this XML document. So now I can simply go back out to the Stylus XML document here and just copy it and paste it into Visual Studio like this. We can see it applies to two file extensions, Style and Stylus. I'm going to save this. So had this been a JSON document, I would have to have changed the file name here to .json. And all I need to make sure is that for this language file, this grammar file, that the build action is set to content and the include in v6 property is set to true. So now I have my language definition. This is basically how this has all the regular expressions and everything I need to colorize this language. So now I can go into this other file here, the package.def file, which lets me create an icon for this new language. So in Solution Explorer, I may want to have an icon that corresponds to the language. And Visual Studio ships with a bunch of icons. And we can actually see them right here. So if we jump in, we see the known monikers here. So it's almost 4,000 icons. And so I can select one that's really good that has to do with CSS and styling. And, you know, I want to use a particular icon. As you see here, there's a lot to choose from. But I want to find one that I can reuse. So I'm going to just search. I know there's one called Airbrush. So let me just copy this, Airbrush. I'm going to paste that in right here. And we're going to change this to the file extension to style like this. I'm going to copy it because we are supporting two file extensions here, Style and Stylus. We both give them the same language. And finally, I'm going to open my v6 manifest, which is the metadata about my extension. And we can see here, we're going to make sure that we have a good title for the extension. We should have a good description and some tags, and a license file would be good. But let's just leave it at this. And now to test, I'm just going to hit Control F5, which means start without debugging. I could debug, but there's not really anything to debug here. There's no C# files, for instance, that I can set a breakpoint at. So I'm just going to Control F5 this. And the experimental instance starts up. So this is the same Visual Studio that I built my extension in. That's going to start up and have the extension already installed. So let me open a project. So now my project has loaded. And we can see here I have a stylus file. We see the icon showing up being that airbrush icon. And if I open the file, we see that I get colorization and I get outlining or code folding. And I get basic auto-completion as well, based on symbols found in the same document. So let's open the extension manager to see that the extension that we had is in fact an extension installed like any other extension here. And we may want to take this extension and publish it to the Visual Studio Marketplace or send to our friends or whatnot. And so if we go back to our project here, if we open the output directory, so the bin folder and debug in this case, we can see we have the stylus language.v6 file right here, and that is our extension. So the whole support for the stylus language that we just saw working is captured within this extension that can install into any Visual Studio out there. Thank you. Let's take a look and see how we can make Visual Studio a little bit tidier when we open solutions and when we start Visual Studio. Kind of the equivalent of giving Visual Studio that fresh car smell every time we use it. So there's a couple of settings. There's an extension. I want to show you a few things. And the benefit of doing this is also that we're getting better performance out of Visual Studio. So it will actually start up faster. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So here I have Visual Studio, and I'm going to open a solution that I already have. And notice how it's going to take a little while here. And the very first time I open it, we see that it remembered what documents I had opened the last time, which one was selected, and it remembered the scroll position and what's collapsed and expanded in Solution Explorer. So this is all state that was stored from last time I had the solution open, and it's by default being restored the next time I open it. And that's what we saw right here. But you can imagine that that actually takes a little bit of CPU cycles to restore everything to its former state. And you know, I like to, when I open a solution, that I have like no documents open, and I don't see, I don't care where I was the last time I used this solution in the Solution Explorer. I don't care what folders I had expanded and all that. In fact, I would like them not to be expanded so that I have sort of a fresh start. Okay, so that's what I meant by the fresh car smell. We keep sort of Visual Studio fresh that way. It doesn't remember that state. Now, this might not be a scenario you prefer, but it's one that I prefer. But I'm going to show you how you can change this default behavior. So if you open Tools Options and you go to the Projects and Solutions node, you can see we have two settings. One of them is called Reopen Documents on Solution Load. Nope, we don't want Visual Studio to do that, so I'm going to uncheck that. The next one is Restore Solution Explorer Project Hierarchy State on Solution Load. So that's the thing in Solution Explorer where I don't care if, I actually don't want any of my nodes to be expanded. So just give me sort of the collapsed state. So I'm going to uncheck that as well, so we don't restore that state. So let me close the solution, and let's open it again and see if you notice a difference. There we go. So it was now a minimal effort for Visual Studio to open my solution here because it didn't have to open the documents. And one thing about opening documents is that it now has to start the language services and all that. If it's a C# file, it has to start the C# language service. And so it actually does a lot of things under the hood. But by unchecking these two checkboxes, we make sure that it doesn't do any of that. Not until I go in and I open the file I want to edit or look at. So that's a really simple way to keep Visual Studio fresh and clean and tidy, and at the same time get some performance benefits. And this is on the solution level. Now there's a thing we can do on the the shell level, Visual Studio itself, the global level, which is has to do with tool windows. So if you're like me, you use different tool windows for different scenarios, and sometimes you end up having like a bunch of tool windows here docked at the bottom next to the arrow list and the output window. And sometimes they're visible. So in this case, maybe the output window is visible, maybe the arrow list, and maybe Team Explorer is the one that's visible when I open Visual Studio. But usually that's not what I'm interested in. Usually I kind of want to go back to my default when I start Visual Studio, which is just show me Solution Explorer and maybe also arrow list. Like those are the two that I care about the most, but actually just Solution Explorer. So that helps me, if I can do that when Visual Studio starts, that helps me keep Visual Studio nice and tidy. And there's a performance benefit here in that Visual Studio does not have to create all those tool windows. So what I've done is that I've installed an extension that's called Reset Tool Windows. So you can get that if you go to the Extension Manager dialog and just search for Reset Tool Window. You can do that. And if we go into Tools Options, we can configure it under Environment, Startup, and Reset Tool Windows. So in here you can see that by default what this extension will do is that it will auto hide all the windows that are visible, that are docked. And it will only maintain the ones docked that I have specified here. So here's a list of like known tool windows that are fast, that are kind of safe to use. And so that's why this is the short list. So only Solution Explorer is one is set to true by default, but I can say show me Solution Explorer and show me error lists, let's say. So both of those are true. But I'm actually going to go with the default here. So now, let's see here. Solution Explorer is not visible. And I have error list and output window up here, which I don't want the next time I start Visual Studio. I just want Solution Explorer. That's what I just configured. So let's restart Visual Studio. I'm going to close it down and start it back up. And now you can see we're back to a very clean, fresh car smell in Visual Studio. Solution Explorer is the only thing that's docked and visible, and everything else has been auto-hidden, and I can very easily dock them manually when I need them. But I can configure this to my liking. And so these are three different things, 2 checkboxes and an extension, that allow me to keep Visual Studio fresh and clean and tidy, as well as give me a boost in performance. Let's take a look at how we can upload an extension for Visual Studio to the Visual Studio Marketplace online. Now, the Visual Studio Marketplace is where people upload extensions so that everybody can download them and install them into Visual Studio very easily. Let's first go to Visual Studio where I have my extension project. It's right here. I'm done building my extension, and I've built it into a v6. So if I look in my bin folder, I can see that the output here is a v6 file, and the v6 is an extension. So this is actually the finished product that I now want to upload to the marketplace. So I'm going to head back here to the marketplace where I can hit Publish Extension in the upper right corner. That's going to prompt me to sign in using my Microsoft account. And if I haven't uploaded any extension before, it asks me to fill in like a few details like name and other things like that. Just very short little profile. And then it puts me into a list of all the extensions that I own. And here's my list. This is a list of the extensions that I've updated and uploaded over the years. If this is your first time, your list will be empty. Now you can go in and click the New Extension drop-down and select between Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, and Azure DevOps. So you can upload extensions for each of these different platforms. And in this video, we're going to use Visual Studio. And the first thing it asks for is the file, the v6 file itself. So we're going to select that and hit continue. It's going to upload that, and it's going to pre-fill all the information that it was able to gather from the extension itself. And then it asks for a name. So this is usually the name of the extension without spaces or any special characters, and it's used for the URL for the landing page on the marketplace for this extension. So I'm going to fill that in. See here, it was able to find out what version, display name, and the ID I had in my manifest file, even the logo icon that I chose, and the short description. Now these are all things that are going to show up in the Visual Studio's Extension Manager dialog and elsewhere. But here I have a bigger field to write some markdown for the page itself. And this is basically where I want to showcase my extension so people can see what it does, have a really nice description. And I already have a markdown file right here. And I'm going to grab the content of that, paste it in. We get a little preview. And then I'm gonna select tools and categories, and this particular category, or sorry, extension, has to do with, let's say, web and testing. So I'm going to select two categories, and in tags I could say something like unit for unit test, and let's say and web test, just like that. Then I can say, should it be free, paid, or is it a trial? No, this is a free extension. And if I have a source code repository URL, like a GitHub URL or Bitbucket or any public-facing URL for where the source code is, I should put it in here. And this is highly recommended that you do, because that will drive people to your extension repo for any pull requests or issues and so on. And that's all you have to do. And now we can click Save and Upload. And that takes us back to the page where we can now scroll down and find, where is it? Let's see here, my demo extension. We can see here a few things are happening. So one is that it's now verifying. Okay, so it's running some sort of verification on the extension itself up on the marketplace. And so it checks for like security things and other things that it's important that it verifies. And it could take a couple of minutes. Another thing we can see is that it is not public. So by default, when you upload a new extension, it's private. That means that it's only you, when you're logged in, that can see this extension. And once it's done verifying, we can mark it as public. So let's fast forward and see you again when it's done verifying. So now the extension has been verified, and we can see here we can do some actions by clicking right here, and we can now make this public. So let's do that, and we're going to say OK, make it public. And now if we open this extension, we can see here that we have a page. Everyone can now access it. And that's it. We have our extension ready on the marketplace, fully uploaded for everyone to use. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you. Hi. Let's take a look at how we can assign keyboard shortcuts to commands in Visual Studio. This is really helpful for the situations where there's a certain command that you use a lot, and it will be easier if you use the keyboard to execute it. And in this case, that's kind of exactly what I want to do. So my scenario is I open a solution, and this solution is I'm using Git and GitHub, and oftentimes I want to pull the latest changes down to my source code before I start coding. So I'll go to Team Explorer and click the sync button, and then I go in here and I can do a pull to get the latest. I think that's a little cumbersome. I would like to do that just with a keyboard shortcut, so I don't have to go to Team Explorer. I think that would be really nice. So I'm going to go up here. Control Q gets me into the search field, and I can search for keyboard. And I'm going to check the one here for environment keyboard, or change hotkeys and keyboard shortcuts. We're going to open that one, and that's going to get us into the tools options for the keyboard. So now I can see if I can find this command for doing a git pull. So I'm just going to search for pull, and I can see it's probably this one right here. So this is a list of all the commands that are available in Visual Studio, and I can just do a quick search here. So now that I found my command, I need to assign a shortcut to it. And I can see here there's no shortcut assigned to this particular command. So what shortcut do I want? Something to remember that's easy. I'm going to do Control-Shift-P. Let's see if that's available. Control-Shift-P. I'm going to type that in here. And I can now see that there is, in fact, one or more things that have that shortcut. Let's open this drop-down. No, just one. There's just one thing in here. And we can see in parentheses at the end that this applies to the difference viewer, or the diff viewer. So this is about scope. So if we look here, this is a list of scopes. Global means the global scope. So that means the keyboard shortcut will work anywhere. But I can scope it to a specific editor, like let's say the JSON editor. So it only works when I am currently editing a JSON file. And the more narrow the scope, always wins. So a JSON editor scope always wins over a global scope. But in this case, I want the global scope. And let's see here. So I'm going to assign it. So even though it's already assigned to a different scope, I can now assign it to the global scope. There we go. And click OK. And now if I hit Control-Shift-P, we can see that it's going to do a git pull. And there we have it. So that's how easy it is to do a keyboard shortcut for an existing command. Hello. So let's take a look at how to create an extension pack for Visual Studio. And an extension pack is an extension that installs other extensions. And so you can bundle up extensions and share them with the world or for yourself. And like any other extension for Visual Studio, the first thing we have to make sure is that we have the Visual Studio extension development workload installed. So go to the Visual Studio installer and make sure that you have a check mark here in this workload. Once you do, you can go in and create a new project called an extension pack project. We have right here, and I'm just going to call this one the best HTML tools. That's going to be the name of my project. And I get this Visual Studio extension created for me. And the file that's open here, the JSON file, is what makes any Visual Studio extension into an extension pack. So any Visual Studio extension can ship a JSON file like this and will then function as an extension pack. So it comes with two examples of extensions that I can use here. I want some HTML related ones. So I'm going to go in here and say I want the snippet pack, and I'm going to click copy ID. This is the marketplace website, marketplace.visualstudio.com. And I'm going to paste that in here. So that was the and I'm going to copy in other ones as well. Let's get this one. There we go. And this was HTML Tools 2019. So now I have my extension pack set up. All I need to do is to make sure that the metadata is accurate. So we want to make sure the title is the right title. Author name, ID, we want a good description here. And also another important thing is that we want an icon. So let me add an icon. It's a PNG file. And I can use that here. Use the icon PNG. I'm going to just see the properties of that icon file and make sure include in v6 is set to true. Just like that. And now I can build my project just like I can build any other Visual Studio project. And it's done. Let's look in the output directory. We now have a v6. This is a Visual Studio extension. And if I double click that to run it, we get the v6 installer dialog popping up. And it'll show us the extensions included here in the extension pack. So now anyone that gets this v6 file can then determine which of these extensions they want. And that's it. That's how easy it is to create an extension pack for Visual Studio. Thank you for watching.
Hi, I'm Allison Buchholz-Au, and today I'm going to be talking to you about one of my favorite Visual Studio features that I don't think enough people know about, saved window layouts. So, saved window layouts are great for those of you who have different windows or tool panels open depending on what you're doing. So whether you're on a multi-monitor setup where you have plenty of space and you can drag the output window to one monitor and have your code editor in another, versus those of you on laptops who maybe have a setup for debugging versus looking at work items versus your classic coding. Saved window layout saves you time by letting you save your window layout and then apply them on the fly without having to drag windows around to where you'd like them, resize them, and so forth. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. So here you see I've got my classic work item window here. This is great because when I'm looking at my work items, that's really all I want to do. So I've got my work item layout here. If I go to Window, Apply Window Layout, you'll see that I've already got many window layouts here. I've got a testing one, a debugging one, and a work item one. And let's see what that looks like. So if I go to testing, it asks me, am I sure I want to apply it? Because it's about to rearrange my whole screen here. If I trust it all the time, I can always click this check mark and say, don't show me this again, and click OK. And here you'll see it changed it. It opened up my Test Explorer, which I like to have open when I'm doing testing. It opened up my error list, and I'm actually going to open up my Solution Explorer as well for this case. And I can go ahead and open any files that I'd like. But what's great is that I didn't have to, go to my commands and my menus and find Test Explorer. I didn't have to rearrange my error list. It was just applied for me. Now you might have noticed that there's also the ability to use shortcuts. So I can do Control-Alt-2, Control-Alt-3. So if I wanted to do the debugging one, let's go ahead and debug this test to show how this would work. I'll go ahead and debug this. Cool, so now we're in debugging mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Control-Alt-3. And it's going to say, do I want to apply the layout debugging? And I say, okay. So now it's given me the debugging layout that I personally like. It's got my breakpoints, my watch window, and my locals. And the great thing is I can always create new window layouts. So let me go ahead and stop this. So let's say, for example, now that I'm back here, I want to go ahead and pin my Solution Explorer. I want to get rid of my error list, my output window, so that my error list is here. And now that I have my code window open and Solution Explorer open, I want to go ahead and save this as my code editing. Let's actually close Test Explorer. We don't need Test Explorer if we're just code editing. So what I can do is I can go to Window, I can go to Save Window Layout, and I can write Code Edits. That's what I'm going to name it, and click OK. And now that has been saved as a window layout for my code editing scenario. So now I can actually easily flip between any of these. I can go back to testing very easily. I can do Control-Alt-5 and go to my code edits and see that as well. And so saved window layouts really allows you to be able to take control of your window layouts and save presets so that you aren't wasting your time rearranging all your windows on different monitors or trying to figure out the best way to lay it out every time you open a new solution or enter a new mode of development. What's also great is that if you're like me and you are constantly docking and undocking your laptop, you might notice that every now and then, if you've got a window that's outside of the main Visual Studio window, that sometimes it flies off the edge and you can't even access it. So like if I were to put this like over here, where it's sort of going off the edge, and unplug it from a monitor, sometimes I can't even access that window. But the great thing is that with saved window layouts, it can snap it all back to the screen that you're used to. So no more having to restart Visual Studio in order to get your windows back. I hope this helps you guys, and I hope that you enjoy saved window layouts as much as I do.
Hey everybody, my name is Leslie Richardson. I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio Debugging and Diagnostics team. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about the new search feature for the autos, locals, and watch windows in Visual Studio 2019 and why you should ultimately use it, because at the end of the day, it can help save you a lot of time and make you more productive while you're debugging. So in order to showcase this feature, I have this .NET Core application in Visual Studio 2019 here, and I also have this list containing a bunch of different recipe objects. So in this case, I just want to go through all of these recipe objects and locate individual ones. But at first glance, the moment I expand this, I am ready to be annoyed because I have 61 objects contained in this list. So if I wanted to, for instance, find all recipes containing salad, I'd have to expand each one of these, locate its title property, which is all the way at the bottom here. And whoops, this one is not a salad recipe, so I'm going to have to go back, rinse and repeat until I find all the objects that I'm interested in. So this is going to take a lot of time. It'd be one thing if this list contained 10 or less items, but unfortunately this is a larger list containing 61 different items and a lot of properties under each object. So there are a couple things that I'd like to do to help make my watch window experience in this case a lot easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is use an attribute called the debugger display. And this is a feature that will allow me to customize how I view my objects in the watch window, autos window, locals window, data tips, and any other debugger window. So to demonstrate this, you'll notice that in the value column here, I am just being shown the type of each object, which I kind of already knew. So it would be a lot more helpful and useful if I got more specific info and was able to view each object by their particular property rather than a type. So I can use debugger display in order to do that. So I need to go to where I first define my class, and at the top of the class definition, I'm going to add some debugger display syntax. And I'm using curly brackets here to return the value of a property that I want displayed in these windows. So because I want to view each recipe by their title, I'm going to use the recipe title property here. And I modified my code, so I need to hit restart. And that should give me more useful information. So debugger display is a feature that is available for managed code users. So if you use C#, F#, or Visual Basic and are debugging in any of those languages, then you should definitely try this out. But if you're a C++ user and are wondering, is there an equivalent feature that you can use, I'm pleased to tell you that there is. It's called NatViz. And the main difference between NatViz and debugger display is that you're going to have to create a separate NatViz file. And it's basically just some XML where you can add in properties that you want displayed in any of these debugger windows. So here's the magic of debugger display, because when I expand my recipes list here, you'll notice that I've gotten a lot more helpful info here. I can see each object by their title right off the bat, so I don't have to expand each one of these to find what I'm looking for. So from there, it should be a lot easier to locate each item by their specific properties or keywords. So if I wanted to find the recipes that contain salad in them, it would take a little less time, but because there's still 61 items, it's still going to take some time and it'll be a little tedious. So this is where search for the watch window kicks in. And instead of scrolling for what I want or expanding for what I want, I can just search for it instead. We're going to type in salad and hit enter. And immediately it'll take me to the location that matches my keyword, which saves me a whole lot of time. Super helpful. And if I wanted to find any other matches that Visual Studio found for me, I can hit find next. And it will take me through all of those as well. So if I wanted to navigate backward and forward through this list of matches, I can change my search depth to 1. And what that's doing is I'm changing how thorough I want my search to be. So when I had my search depth at 2, Visual Studio is essentially performing a depth-first search through each object. So it's going to go 2 levels deep into one particular object, and then it's going to return back to that root node for that object and then go to the next one, and so on and so forth until it finds matching keywords. So with a search depth of 1, I can scroll backwards and forward through all of my recipes containing salad. Awesome. So from there, let's say I wanted to locate another property like extended ingredients. So again, I can search for it. Only this time I'm getting a notification telling me that no matches are found. But the first suggestion that it gives me is maybe I should change my search step to a larger number. And to do that, or by doing that, I am telling Visual Studio to perform a more thorough search. So I'm going to bump up my search step from 1 to 3. Because extended ingredients is a property that is nested a little bit deeper inside each of these objects. And when I hit enter, I'm taken to that same matching keyword, which is awesome. Again, I don't have to expand each individual object. I don't have to scroll through all of my objects or scroll through all of these properties until I find the one that I want. I can just use search like I would in any other typical search engine, which is fantastic. It's honestly amazing that we as human beings have managed to live this long without having search engines for the longest time. Like, I still don't know how I did it. Just 10 plus years ago. It was crazy. All right, and that was search for the autos, locals, and watch windows. So this is a Visual Studio 2019 exclusive feature. So if you're interested in trying it out and you're super excited about it and are ready to make your life a bit more productive when you're constantly having to inspect hundreds of items in the watch window, then you should definitely check this out if you already have 2019 installed. But if you don't have Visual Studio 2019, you can go download it at visualstudio.com. And with that, happy coding.
Let's explore how we can have Visual Studio handle large solutions in a better way by using a new feature called Solution Filters. This was a feature that was introduced in Visual Studio 2019. And so here I have a solution. This is the Productivity Power Tools that you might know, the extension. And it consists of a bunch of projects. Now, this is by no means as big as a lot of the solutions that we see out in the wild. And you probably have solutions that are bigger than this. But this is the biggest one I've got on my laptop right now. So this can take a while to load, right? The bigger the solution, the more has to load when you open it. So let's see if there's something we can do. I'm going to just close the solution. And then I'm going to open it again, but in a special way. So I'm going to find my SLN file right there. And I'm going to click this checkbox that says, do not load projects. And let's see how fast I can load my solution now. Boom, it's instant. And that's because that none of the projects were loaded. So Visual Studio didn't do anything to initialize project systems and so on, and it could just load the solutions really quickly. And the reason you want to do this is because you don't want to work on every single project in your solution. You may just want to work on a couple of projects. And so I want to work on this particular project. So I'm going to right click and say reload project. That's going to load this one project. I'm going to right click again and say load project dependencies. So then it's going to find what other projects in the solution that it depends on and load those as well. In this case, it was just one other project. So now we see that these two are now the only loaded projects. I can go up on the solution node and say, show all files and uncheck that. And now it's only the projects that I care for in this particular case that are loaded and visible to me. So that's really nice. I can very easily work with this. It's a sort of a nice and a clean thing. But the problem is I have to do this exercise every time I open my solution. And wouldn't it be nice if I could just right click the solution, go all the way down and say save as solution filter. So it's gonna open up a save file dialog here, and I'm going to call this column guide was the name of these projects .slnf. Okay, SLN is the solution file, and we're going to put an F onto that, and that's a solution filter, and save that. So when I save this file, it lives next to the SLN file. That means I can check it into my repo, and it's now available to me and my colleagues. So anyone that just want to work on these two projects, they can open the SLNF file which is the filter. So that means that even though it's a huge solution, it opens super fast, and it's just this subset of projects that gets loaded. And so that's just really nice. And you can have as many of these SLNF files in your repo as you want. So you can have one for the front end team, one for the back end team, however you want to slice and dice your huge solution into smaller chunks. So that's solution filters. And of course, we can always go in here, right click and say, just load all the projects again. And it will go ahead and do that. And that might take a little time, right? Because you might have a big project. But you always have the ability to kind of manipulate, go back and forth, change things, modify these filters, and create new ones as you see fit. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you. Sometimes you want to suggest extensions to your colleagues, and they could be extensions that are publicly available, but you want to create a little list for them so they have something that to choose from that are good extensions that will help them. And other times you might have extensions for Visual Studio that you have built internally in your company that you want to share with everyone, but you don't want to upload them to the marketplace, which is a place where everyone in the world can then use them. You want to keep them internally to your company. So let's take a look at how private galleries can solve both of those problems relatively easily. And what we really want to do is we want to get in here into the extension manager dialog. And if you look here under the online tab, you can see that there's the Visual Studio Marketplace. All right, so that's the global one. We want to get our own custom one in here next to it. So first of all, I need to get a bunch of extensions that I want to have part of my sort of private marketplace or gallery. And I have that here. I have a bunch of extensions that I've put into a folder. And in order for me to share this, I might have put that folder on a network share so everyone in the company or my team has access to it. I also put an exe file in here called Private Gallery Creator. And I got that from GitHub. So if you go to GitHub, the Private Gallery Creator repo, there's a link below here in the description. You can go to releases and just download the exe file directly from here. Now, what that allows me to do is simply just double click. And that will start a console app. And it will produce a feed, an XML Atom feed, based on these extensions. And if some of these extensions are particularly big or complex, it could take a little bit of time, and others are super fast. So it's now done, and we can see that we now have an XML file. We also have a hidden folder here with icons in it, so it extracted the icons out. So this feed is consumable by Visual Studio. Let's take a look at how we do that. So I go to extensions up here, and here at the bottom of the dialog, I'm just going to click change your settings for extensions. And then I'm going to add an additional extension gallery. I'm going to call it my gallery, and the URL is the feed, this file right here. So I'm going to hold down shift and right click, and that's going to give me an option here called copy as path. And then I'm going to go back into Visual Studio, paste that in, and remove the quotation marks that is automatically being inserted here, like that. Hit apply, and OK. So now, when I go into my extension manager dialog, you can see that there's now a My Gallery right here. And that lists all the extensions that I have in that feed that I have on my network share where everyone can access them. If these extensions that I have in my custom feed also exist on the marketplace, then auto update will happen automatically regardless of which of the feeds, the Visual Studio Marketplace feed or the My Gallery feed. Whichever one has the newest version, Visual Studio will update the extension from there. So you don't actually have to maintain the local gallery always with the latest versions. If they're also on the marketplace, then the users will automatically get the updates. So that's how you do that. And there's a lot more. If you go into that GitHub repo, you can read a lot more about how this works. What are the different options? You can call the exe with to have it automatically create the a new feed whenever a new v6 file is updated on disk, and all these different parameters you can use to customize and ultimately get the exact behavior that you want for your custom feed. I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching. Hi. I want to show you some tips and tricks for working with JSON files in Visual Studio. Before we dig in, we have to make sure that we have the JSON editor experience installed. And so we're going to open the installer, the Visual Studio installer, and go into the individual components and make sure that we have the ASP.NET and Web Development Tools checkbox checked. If we don't, check it, install it. It's a small little thing to install if you don't have it already. If you already have the ASP.NET Web Tooling or .NET workloads installed, you're likely going to have this as well. But just make sure. And so if we have that installed and we open a JSON file, we're going to see something similar to this. This is an empty file. And I'm now going to type a new property. Let's call this ABC. So in JSON, properties have to be in quotes. But I don't actually have to type quotes around properties in Visual Studio. I can just type the name of the property and then hit colon. There we go. So inserting the colon will automatically insert the quotes for me. And let's give this a value, hello. I'm going to hit the quotation mark here again, and it just kind of writes over the end quotation mark. So that's kind of nice, and we know this from other languages as well. I just want to make sure that you see that it works here too. Now, let's copy a string of JSON into this editor. Let me just copy this line that I have right here. And I'm going to copy it in after my existing properties. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to hit Control V for paste. Notice how Visual Studio automatically formatted the string that I pasted in, so it's no longer minified in one line as what I was copying. And it also inserted the comma after the first property for me to make this document a valid JSON document. So there's some logic in here that makes sure that it will keep itself valid if it can. Let me undo once here, and you can see now we have that long one line. I'm going to undo again, and then we're back to where we started. I can also paste this on top. So let's paste it right here. And we see the same formatting happening, and now the comma was added to the end of what I pasted in, again, to make the document valid. The final thing I want to show you here is the light bulbs. So we have a light bulb that lets us sort properties alphabetically. So now we can see here ABC is now the first one because alphabetically it's before friends. It will automatically sort the properties that are on the same level or in the same scope as the one that you're clicking on. And that makes it super easy. You can go into nested objects and arrays and whatnot and easily order alphabetically in there. There's also a feature for working with schema files. So let's say I want to write a JSON version of a resume. There's a chance that if I look through all the different schemas that are supported, that one of them will be a resume, and it is. So these are well-known formats of JSON files that's coming from schemastore.org, which Visual Studio automatically integrates with. And that gives us full IntelliSense for what a format like this could be. So if I were to write a resume, I might use an existing format. Could be something like this. It even makes sure that I don't do any mistakes. So let's say awards here. Let's say I made a spelling mistake here, it will actually call that out saying, hey, no, this is not a valid property. So all that information is coming from the schema. It's coming from schema.org and is right here in Visual Studio as we type. So I can easily go fix this. There we go. So that was the first round of tips and tricks with JSON. We're going to have another video showing much more about JSON schemas, how to write them, how to use them. So stay tuned for that. Thank you. Hello. Let's take a look at how we can use JSON schema files for providing intelligence and validation to our JSON documents. JSON schema is conceptually the same as an XML schema or XSD file, but it's all expressed in JSON. And so let's take a look at what I've got here in the project. I have document.json and schema.json. And so my idea is that I want to define the rules and the format and all this sort of stuff in my schema file. And I want to fill in all the values that adheres to that format in my document file, document.json in this case. So right off the bat, if you just have an empty JSON file, you get no IntelliSense, right? It doesn't know what you're about to do, so it has no concept of IntelliSense for this, obviously. So let's go ahead and define the schema file. So the very first thing we have to do is to add a $schema property. And I have to select the JSON schema.org draft 4 value here. This will now make this schema file is now an official JSON schema. That's all we have to do to make it official schema, but of course it doesn't really do anything yet. I haven't defined any properties, and so let's go ahead and do that. So because I now have defined what my schema is, in this case the draft 4 schema, Visual Studio knows how to provide IntelliSense for me. And so I'm going to add a property here called URL. And this is of type string. And the format is URI. Okay. So I'm going to save my schema file. And now I'm going to go back to my document file. And I have to tell my document what schema to use. And so I can just go up here and select an existing schema or type in the address of any schema that I want. Or since it's in the same project, I'm just going to drag schema.json up to that drop down and hit enter. And now I get IntelliSense for the URL property that I just defined. You see here it gives me an error, a validation error. It says, hey, this has to be a valid URI. So here's my website. So, but it's actually not a valid URI because I forgot the protocol. And here we go. So now I have both IntelliSense for my properties as well as validation going on here. And I can make it even better. I can add a description here. And we can call this the address of your website. So now when we go back here and hover, we can see that we actually get that nice tooltip about what the URL property is doing. But we can go even further. And so we can say, let's say we have something where you're going to select an enum value. Let's do a version. So this is a type enum. Oh, sorry, I don't have to do that. Here we go, enum values. So let's say version. What version of this document, for instance, of this schema are you going to use? We can now do this. If we go back after saving, I can now see that I have versions showing up here. And I get IntelliSense for the 2 possible values that I can choose. There's a lot more to JSON schema than just strings and enums, as I showed here. There's arrays and objects and a bunch more stuff. And you can actually be very expressive in the rules that you want to apply to your document. So whether you want to have your schema file in the same project or solution as your documents, or you want to put them on a network share or a web address somewhere, it all works in Visual Studio. You just type the path of the URL to the schema up here and apply it to the document. And it will be saved in the project system so that anyone on the team opens the same project, the same schema will apply to those documents. And so this is a really rich experience, and this is a really great place to write JSON schemas. So this is available in Visual Studio, not just the latest version, but since 2013. And so I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Hi. I want to show you one of my favorite extensions, which is called Add New File. So if you go to the extension manager in Visual Studio and you search for Add New File, you'll see the extension showing up right here. And so what is it exactly that this extension does that's so awesome? Well, it gives me a keyboard shortcut. So I can now hit Shift F2, which is a very nice sort of one-handed maneuver that's very easy to do without looking at the keyboard. Shift F2. That pops up a little dialog super fast, and it allows me to enter a file name. So I can add a new file name here. It could be test.cs for a C# file. And it gives me a class. You see, this is a public class test, the same name that I gave this file. So there's some templates built into this thing. It doesn't use the Visual Studio template system. It has its own sort of unique and very few templates. The idea is that it adds a new empty file or sort of an empty starting point. Sometimes that starting point means there's a little bit of code in there, like in the case of the C#, but it also is a little bit smart. So I just added a C# class, but if I name my file as something that starts with a capital I, like ifoo.cs, then it knows that it's an interface because of the naming, and it automatically inserts or creates an interface for me here. I can also do things that is maybe a little bit hard to do otherwise, such as create a file that starts with a dot, like let's say gitignore file, .gitignore, if I can spell it right, which I couldn't. Or a file that doesn't even have a file extension, like just the word license. It will give me a text file without a file extension. So that's really nice and a super fast way of adding files. Now let's take a look at maybe a little bit more advanced features that's in here. Let's say I want to create a new folder inside the www root folder of this project. Again, Shift F2, notice that the www root folder is selected. I selected that with the mouse here and hit Shift F2, and so now I can create a folder. Let's just call it folder, and I'm going to end that with a / or a \, either way, and hit enter, and that will create a folder. So now I have that right here. I could also have said create a new file that's in a new folder or an existing folder. So let's do folder, and inside that we have a dir, and then we have test.css. And that will automatically create that folder path for me. So I can also come into any other folder and create multiple files. So I can say, want to create foo.css, bar.css. And that will create both files, both the bar and the foo.css files, because I can separate them with a comma. And the same is true if I want to do folder. So I can do folder 1, folder 2. And that will give me 2 folders. So it's very flexible and it's very, very fast. And the convenience of just Shift F2, and it knows what folder you're already on, what file is open, and so it's relative to sort of your active context where it will create those files, is really, really convenient. I've added a link to the extension in the description below, so go check it out, and thanks for watching. Hi. let's talk about settings in Visual Studio and learn a little bit about the different aspects of them. So settings are stored up under the Tools top-level menu, under Options, and there's quite a few of them, as you can see here. The number of settings and the different types of settings that you've got depends on the different workloads and components that you've installed with Visual Studio. And that includes extensions. So any extension can also add to the options dialog here. So everyone's tools options looks a little bit different. What we can do is we can search. So let's say I want to learn about a feature that has to do with synchronization of settings. So one thing that Visual Studio will do is if you're signed in to Visual Studio using your Microsoft account, it will synchronize settings by default so that whenever you get a new laptop, a new computer, have to set up a home or work environment or something like that, and you sign in with the same account, the settings that you have changed, that you have selected, roam across those different installations of Visual Studio. So that gives you sort of the same setup on multiple machines, which is really, really nice. There are some that want to turn that off. There are a couple of reasons why you may want to do that. So you can do that under Accounts right here, this simple checkbox. So as I said, you can search within this dialog, but you can also go to the Visual Studio search and search here, and that will also take you straight into that subpage in this dialog. So you don't have to first open the dialog and then search. You can do it very quickly from that other menu. Cool. I said menu, I meant the Visual Studio search up here. So that's all cool. There's a lot of settings. There's a lot of things to go explore. So I will suggest you go take a look. A lot of people don't actually know what's available in those settings. So it might be very interesting to go just see what's there and see if you can optimize some settings for your workflows and your scenarios. One thing we can do is that we can import and export settings. So even though that we by default synchronize settings across machines, maybe you want to export those settings into a file and share with a team member or store somewhere so you can restore that by importing them back into Visual Studio at a later time, maybe after setting up a new machine. And so this would be primarily a scenario where you don't synchronize settings or that you can't because you're dealing with different accounts. So we can export, import the settings. It's very simple. It writes to a file or it reads from a file. And also here inside this dialog, we can reset all settings. So this might not be that obvious from the name that just said import, export settings, but this is the same dialog where we would reset all the settings to like a factory default. So you can say, do you want to save those settings? Nope, just reset the settings, which override any changes I've made to the settings, restoring everything back to sort of the factory default. And then that will be your new synchronization settings. So if you roll everything back to the factory default, after the synchronization then happens, all your machines, all your installations on the same account will go back to the default settings. And from here you can do your changes that you want. So it's a really good place if you get stuck, if you've added some settings and you don't remember how to change them back, then go in here, reset all settings, and you're good to go. So I hope this was helpful. Just a little overview of just some of the aspects of settings in Visual Studio. Thank you. Hi. Let's take a look at how you can change the theme of Visual Studio so that you get the colors that you want for both text and the shell and tool windows and all the other aspects of the UI. So if you go to Tools and Options, and the very first setting here called Environment General has a color theme dropdown. And in here you find 4 different built-in themes. And you can easily select the one you want and click OK, which applies the theme And now it's dark, and a lot of people like that, so that's great. So that's how you find and select and apply the theme that you want. But what if you want a theme that's not built in? What if you want a custom theme? Because a lot of editors and IDEs out in the world, they have all these themes, so you might be used to that. There might be certain themes that you like. So let's see how we can find additional themes. So we go to extensions, and if we open the Visual Studio Marketplace tree view here and go all the way down to themes, we can see a list here of all the different themes that are available for Visual Studio. This same list we can also find online. So if we go to marketplace.visualstudio.com, we can select here the themes category, and that gives us all these different themes to take a look at. And most of them have screenshots, so we can see the details of how it looks like. This is one that has the blue theme of Visual Studio 2017 in a way that Visual Studio 2019 can consume it. And you can see we have screenshots of these. And simply just download it. It's an extension. So download it, apply it, restart Visual Studio, and you can select your theme, and that's it. So that's how easy it is to select the theme you want and discover new themes that are out there in the wild, written by the Visual Studio community. Thank you. Let's take a look at some helpful things we can do for presenting using Visual Studio. So if you're at a conference or you want a demo to your colleagues or whatever, at some point when you're going to show Visual Studio to a larger audience, you want to make sure that they can see the font sizes, they can see all they need to see in your demo. So for Visual Studio, I have here just my regular instance of Visual Studio with a dark theme, and you can see my font size here on both in the editor, but also like in Solution Explorer, for instance, and the menus up here are a little too small. Like it's hard to see from far away, even on a big screen in a conference hall, for instance. And also dark theme might not be as good for presentations, and so like the blue or the light theme might be better. But instead of me having to go and change all that, so I can do my presentation and then afterwards change it all back, we can do something a little smarter. So I've installed an extension called Tweaks. It'll be linked in the description below. And with Tweaks, I get a handy little shortcut. So I can right click in the taskbar all the way down here, and I now have something called presentation mode. So let's click that. Now that creates a new instance of Visual Studio, but sort of in a parallel universe. Notice here how it didn't carry over the dark theme setting. It's actually a sort of the default settings of Visual Studio. You see I have different window layout. I have the Server, Explorer, and Toolbox over here. I didn't have that before. I got Team Explorer down here. I did not have that either. So this is a different kind of Visual Studio, even though it's actually the same, because you can see I'm still signed in using my own account. Now if I go to Tools Options, we go to Environment and Accounts. By default, synchronize settings across devices when signed into Visual Studio, that setting is unchecked. And that's really nice, because if it was checked, then this version of Visual Studio, the presentation mode version, and my regular version would synchronize all the settings. So my themes and my font size and all that sort of stuff would always be synchronized. And I don't want that for this particular scenario. So let's go ahead and open the same project that I had opened before. Notice, by the way, that it says demo over here. So I can see now that I'm in sort of a demo mode. So here's what it looks like. And I'm going to change the fonts here. So I can go in, go to fonts and colors. And I think I should probably maybe do a 16 pixels for the editor. And then for Solution Explorer and all my menus, I'm going to find this thing called Environment. Notice it's automatic. It follows basically Windows and its font sizes and stuff. But I can go down here and select Sequoia UI, which is the font that it's using by default. And instead of font size 8, let's make it 11. Click OK. So now you can see it's much easier to see. And even Solution Explorer is now visible to even the people on the back row of the conference room or the big auditorium you might be presenting in. So all these settings do not affect, let's close this down, do not affect the original Visual Studio as you see right here. And if I were to go back into presentation mode, it will open up and it will now have remembered all those settings, the different window layout I have, and so on. Even the extensions. So if I go in and look at extensions, I actually have a much different number of extensions. You see, I only have a few here. These are the ones that are called per machine extensions. These are the ones that are common for all Visual Studios on my same machine. But if I go back and look at extensions in my original Visual Studio, you can see I have a lot more. And so I can not only customize the settings, the fonts, all that sort of stuff, window layout, but also the extensions that I use specifically. So for presentation mode, it might be really nice not to have any extensions to kind of give that sort of lowest common denominator kind of presentation where everyone has exactly what you're presenting as well. They don't need like external extensions, for instance, to see what you're seeing. So that removes some confusion and some noise from your presentation and might be really helpful. So that was it. That was my tip. So go check out the Tweaks extension. It's free. It's on the Visual Studio Marketplace. Link below. Thank you. Let's learn about what some of the things inside Visual Studio are actually called. Let's open Visual Studio to the splash screen right here. That's going to show the start window. Here I have a list of solutions in the MRU list. And if I wanted to create a new project, I would open the New Project dialog, or NPD for short, which is what we use internally. I'm just going to open an existing solution. And you can see here as it's preparing, the status bar showing some text. And to the very left here, we got the Task Status Center showing some background tasks running. The two files I've got open, each sits in their own tab in the document well. So all tabs are in the document well. And if we hover over some of the code, we can see the Quick Info tooltip showing up. And if we were writing our method here, we would get signature help that would help us fill in the various different arguments that goes into the methods that we're calling. Signature help. Above each property and method and class, we see some gray text here with some additional information. That's called code lengths. And I also get a light bulb. And that's what it's commonly referred as, just a light bulb. But the actual name is actually suggested action, or sometimes just suggestions. At the top of the editor, depending on your language, you may have none or 2 or 3 of these drop downs right here. That's called the navigation bar. And at the bottom, where we can see there's no issues found, this is the document health indicator. So if I introduce an error in my source code, we can see that the health is not as good right now. So that's the document health indicator. Throughout Visual Studio, I have a lot of different tool windows, whether they're at the bottom or they're docked here on the right hand side, like Solution Explorer. They're all commonly referred to as tool windows. And in Solution Explorer, I can see my files and I can expand them to show virtual nodes about what they contain. In this case, a class that has a bunch of members in it. Those virtual nodes are called progressions. So I'm expanding the progressions. If we right-click a project and go to Properties, we're going to see something that's commonly referred to as the property pages. But the real name is actually App Designer. Though they have no classical design surface, that is their name nonetheless. There are other types of properties. If we get the properties of a file, for instance, we can see the property grid. So a property grid has a collapsible category and then name value pairs. We find that in our Tools Options dialog as well. For instance, right here, I can see the same property grid control showing up in my dialog page. There's different types of dialog pages. There's one that contains the property grid, and then there are some that contains custom UI, like all of these. And finally, the search box up top is called Visual Studio Search or VS Search. It doesn't actually have a name, so we just refer to it as the Visual Studio Search. I hope that helped clear things up a little bit, and see you next time. Let's take a look at a feature you might not know that Visual Studio already had, and it's about how we can expand selection inside the editor right here in Visual Studio. I'm going to use C#, but this works for most other languages as well. So one of the ways I can expand my selection semantically is by using Shift-Alt+. And I can keep hitting Shift-Alt+ to expand the selection up in scope. You see here how it goes up. It takes the method body and then the whole method up to the class and finally up to the namespace. And if I hit Shift-Alt-, just as you would expect, it travels back down and selects sort of the backwards path of what I just did when I expanded. That's super useful. Makes it really easy to select sort of a whole line or a whole statement or a block. But there's another way we can go and take the parent scope and select that just in a single keyboard shortcut. And that's Shift-Alt square bracket. And see here, that just takes the containing element and selects that whole thing, just like this. So if we do it up here, Shift-Alt square bracket, it takes the enclosing element here. And these shortcuts also work in, let's say, JSON. You have the same thing right here, up and down, or select the containing scope right there. And in HTML, it's also super helpful to be able to select a whole line, whole element, for instance, or a whole, the whole parent. And when we have the whole parent selected, we can, for instance, insert a new tag around them by hitting Shift-Alt-W for inserting a div that we can then change to whatever we want it to be. All right, like that. Even in CSS files or SAS or less files, which is a flavor of CSS, where we have a deeper level of nesting, we can do all of these shortcuts, go up and down, or select the whole containing block like that. And of course, we can continue to select the whole containing block, and it will just take the next parent up and the next parent, and so on. So the keyboard shortcuts to remember here, Shift-Alt+ and minus to walk up and down in scope. And then Shift-Alt and the closing angle bracket to walk up to the next containing parent and select the whole thing. Enjoy. In this video, we'll look at how Visual Studio Search is going to help us be more productive when working with code and other features around Visual Studio. I'm going to hit Control-Q, and that's going to put the caret up in the search box up top. And here I can see the recent searches I've done and easily navigate between them, or I can search for something else. For instance, I'm going to search for a code file in my project. It's called something about code cleanup. Here we go. And you can see I can now search all my files. And I can even search using camel humps. So code cleanup on format is the name of the file. So I can say ccof, code cleanup on format, and it can still find those files. And then just hit enter to open it up. Another very useful thing we can do is to find commands that we don't necessarily remember where are, or maybe they're keyboard shortcut. So here I have a formatting issue, and I want to format the document, but I kind of forgot the keyboard shortcut for that. So I can use Control Q again and simply write format document, and it shows up right there. I don't even have to spell it right. So I can do something like this. And so you can do typos, you can do like shorthand, so you can be really fast in executing these commands. And so this way you might not have to even learn those shortcuts, because it's so quick to just do Control Q, format doc like this. Here's another example of that. If I want to surround my selection, then how exactly is it that I'm going to do that? Well, Control Q and surround, and I get surround with, and I can now simply start using the feature like that. Another very useful thing is that I can use the search to find options. So for instance, if I type preview, I can get to the preview features, and this is always a good thing to look through. You can get a list of all the different preview features that is in Visual Studio that you can enable and to try out sort of early on. But you can use it for other things. Here's one of my favorites, just my code. So enable or disable just my code very simply. It's always one that's hard to find, and it's buried a little bit deep in the tools options dialog. So it's a super helpful tool to find those things that you don't always look for and you might have forgotten keyboard shortcuts for, or their location in the options dialog. So these are just some of the ways that the Visual Studio search can help you be more productive. Happy coding! The new Git tooling in Visual Studio makes it easier than ever to back up our solutions and projects to GitHub, so we can easily work with them from any machine. Whether your team, small or large, or an individual or a hobbyist, this is a great benefit. And it's so easy now that once we have our project loaded, like I have right here, a console application, all you have to do is to go to the new menu, Git menu up in the top of Visual Studio, and click Create Git Repository. That will show you a dialog that is already pre-filled in with sort of GitHub owners and accounts and stuff if you've signed in. And it gives the name to the repo that we want to create on GitHub. And by default, it's a private repository. That means it's only you that can see it. So it's not open source, so everyone can see. Your source code is just for you at the moment. But of course, you can just uncheck that checkbox, and now it's a public repository. So all we have to do is click Create and Push. And Visual Studio now in the background will do exactly that. It will create the repository on GitHub and push the code up there. And so if we go and refresh our GitHub page, this is mine, and I hit the refresh button, we can now see I have my console app, and it's private. And if I click into it, it does show up right here. So that is a super easy way, and I'm now under source control. And if I use the new Git changes window, I can see what's going on. I can see what we have incoming, outgoing. And if I make any changes, like let's do a few changes here and save that, we can now see that I get the list of the changes I have, and I can easily commit them, like updated text. I'm going to write that and just commit that and push it up to GitHub. Very simple. But of course, it doesn't end here. There's a lot of features, such as being able to create a pull request of what I've just committed, do branch management, very easy, create a new branch, checking them in and out, merging them together. I can do a fetch, pull, pushes, everything right here with a click of a button. To work with existing Git repository, I can now use the new Git top level menu again, but this time I'm going to click Clone Repository. And from here I can easily browse my Azure DevOps or GitHub repositories with a click of a button. Or I can just paste in any Git URL and click Clone. That starts then the cloning process to get all the source code down onto my machine. And once that is done, it opens up in Solution Explorer, loading the solution that it found in the repo, and I'm ready to code. Now, if there was more than one solution in the repo, it would have defaulted to the new solution view where I would see a list of my solutions and I could just double click the one I wanted and open it right there. Simple as that. So I want to make a code change here. So I'm going to go into this file here and I'm going to change it to a different value. So doing that, I'm now ready to commit my change and I want to go to the new Git changes window. I want to go up and fetch just to see if there's any incoming changes. And I can see that there is. Clicking that will open the new Git repository window right here. And I can see all the different branches. I can see the history and I can also see the incoming commits that are right here that I need to update. I'm going to just go ahead and commit the change that I just did. I'm going to say changed app config and I'm going to commit and push. Visual Studio notices that there was that change up in the original repository and that I need to do a pull first to get all the changes down before I can push my changes up. And I'm just going to click the button that says pull and push. So that completed with some conflicts. And to resolve these conflicts, I'm going to go into the new merge experience that you see right here. I can see what was on the remote server. I can see that the value here changed to all. On my local machine, my change was to change that same value to all except intranet. And so now I have to make a choice. Which do I want to keep? And in this case, I want to keep mine. So I'm just going to click that. And at the bottom, we can see what the result should be. And we could then just write a commit message saying merge completed, like that. Oh, I need to accept the merge. And then write merge completed. And I'm going to commit this and push it by clicking the push button like this. And so now, very, very simply, I've been able to find the merge conflict and resolve it and push the changes back up to GitHub in a very easy workflow. And I hope you're really going to enjoy the new Git experience in Visual Studio 2019.